Our message today is being brought to us by my dear friend Jean-Francois Godet-Calogeras, whom we had the pleasure of hearing a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about St. Francis, and Claire kind of dovetails nicely with that story. So I will turn the podium over to you.
Thank you. Yes, when Kristen asked me if I could bring some presentation, I said I cannot bring you a presentation on Francis and not another one on Clare, because the two of them are together the real co-founders of the Franciscan movement, of which I talked last month. Their world 800 years ago, imagine that city of Assisi, built on the slope of a hill. It's actually a divided society. You have the upper part, which is the older part, where the people who live there are the land owners. They live in the town, but they own land in the valley where you have laborers working for their subsistence. They're the nobility. They're noble, which means basically in Latin that they're known, and they're known by the land that they own. Clare is part of that upper Assisi. There is the lower Assisi. That's where Francis is. They don't communicate very well, to say the least. Those are the business people, craft people, the newer Assisi. The people who change the wealth from land into money. And you can imagine those who have land wants to have money, and those who have money want to have land. Meanwhile, in the plain, in the lowland, they just work hard. So it's not only a class division, it's also a gender division. It's a man's world. Patriarchy. The men have a public life. The women do not. For women, one of the people of law at the time, for a woman, maritum aut murum. The women behind a husband or behind a wall. Married or enclosed in a monastery. Those are the two possibilities. The woman doesn't choose. It's man that will make a deal. Your son, my daughter, like it or not. And if that doesn't work, there is always the monastery. Clare, fortunately, we have rediscovered enough documents. She has been in the shadow, or the shade, or the dark. She comes across at a young age, not just of a woman of spirit, compassion, true religion, but also very assertive, quietly assertive. So she refused to get married to a man who later, after she died, and there is a process to investigate her holiness, and the old man, old at that time, remembered that he was in love with her, but she didn't want to get married. So she breaks those rules, and not only refusing to get married, be married, but she enters into communication relationship with some people from the lower Assisi. And of course the scandal is when she gets in communication relationship with Francis, who has started living an alternative way of life outside of Assisi, and she wants to join. And she's not the only woman. She has actually a whole gang. They must be literally cooking in the house an alternative way. But Clare is their leader. I must mention that she probably got the complicity, no, not probably, certainly got in one way the complicity of the Bishop of Assisi, who understood what was going on and not only gave his blessing to that, but actually facilitated it. I'm not going to go into all the details because we would spend the rest of the day at least. But so finally, Clare and a group of women joined the movement of Francis and his brothers. But they will not go under roads like the men. They settle. And they settle in a little place outside of Assisi called San Damiano. It's a church with a shelter, with a hospice. Of course, Damiano, Damien, and Cosmas are healers. Why settling there? Because it turns out that Clare is also a healer. And Clare and her community of sisters will actually offer hospitality and care, including to Francis toward the end of his life. He spent a couple of months there being taken care of by Clare and the sisters. But also, we realize that after 40 years of the life there in San Damiano, in communication, connection with the whole Franciscan movement, she puts in writing their form of life, what they call now the Rule of St. Clare. It's actually their form of life, the way they live daily. They occupied time and space. It's the first time in history that a woman writes a document for women. Before that, it's always written by men for women. We know what you should do. Let me read you one little paragraph of a letter she sent to somebody she never met in person, a princess in Prague, in Bohemia, Agnes, who wants to start a community like San Damiano. And they exchanged letters. And Agnes gets in difficulty, in tension, in trouble with the Pope. And she complains to Clare. And this is one passage of the letter of response of Clare. I admonish you, like another Rachel, be mindful of your purpose, always looking to your beginning. What you hold now, may you always hold. What you are doing now, do without ceasing. Instead, run even more swiftly, light-footed, treading carefully, so that your stepping raises no dust. Sure, rejoicing and swift on the path of blessedness, believing nothing, agreeing to nothing which would make you want to call this back, or which would place a stumbling block in your way. And she will continue in the letter, and if someone tells you differently, do not follow his advice. The book. Clare offers a wonderful style of women's leadership. And I would like to go a little through that with you. This is what a sister of the community, at the beginning of the investigation after Clare's death, she declared, or it's written by the secretary. The witness also said that 3 years after Lady Clare had been in the order, by that time they call it an order, remember what I developed last month, at the prayers and insistence of Saint Francis, who almost forced her, she accepted the direction and government of the sisters. Asked how she knew this, she said she was present. That Sister Pacifica said right away, Clare did want what Francis wanted. She didn't want to become an abbess, because that was just the common title for the head of a women's community, monastic. That's not what she wanted. I think Francis was thinking that like that, she wouldn't get in trouble with her new third way of life. So Clare agreed, but she doesn't like it, because even if etymologically an abbess means a mother, the reality in the time, the abbess of a community is the queen of that community. It's the one that thrones, that one orders, is a step above, which is totally contradictory with the Franciscan movement. So what did she do? She changed the job description. She went back to the real meaning of abbess, mother of the others. Incidentally, in her writings, the only writing where she uses the word abbess is the official document with the form of life. Everywhere else, she says, the one who has the charge of the sisters. But she doesn't use the word abbess. Only when the document is supposed to get the approval of the Holy See, the papacy, she uses the vocabulary that smartly she knows they want to find. So, in Mediterranean culture, the mother is very important. If the man is the head of the household, the mother governs. The mother governs at home. She is the one that provides the food, the education, runs the household. If you want to understand that even better, go back to the film My Big Fat Greek Wedding. When the father disagrees with the love of the daughter for someone who is not Greek, and the daughter cries, the mother said, the man is the head, but the woman is the neck, and it makes the head turn. That's governing. So how does she develop that? This is in the form of life. The one who is elected shall consider the burden she has taken on herself, and to whom she will render an account of the flock committed to her. She shall study to lead them by her virtues and her holy behavior rather than by reason of her office, so that the sisters, incited by her example, may obey her through love rather than fear. So the abbess is in a position of service, not honor. The leadership is a service for Clare, and a service to which she is accountable. The second element is that the leader for Clare should lead by example and not by commands. It's a matter of authority, not power. Those two words nowadays are sort of confused. They are actually very different. Power is something that people take or are given by others. Authority is something that comes from within, that is recognized and cannot be taken away. We have many people with power, very few with authority. In following that, Clare wants to build consensus. The one who is in charge of the sisters has the responsibility to constantly build consensus. It's not the majority decides, all together. We have a beautiful proof of that in a document, notarial document in 1238. The sisters in San Damiano had received a piece of land, and they did not need it, so they didn't want to keep it. So they want to get rid of it, they want to sell it so that they can actually use the money for their service, the poor. The document is a power of attorney to a member of the community in Assisi to negotiate the sale of the piece of land. It is signed by the 50 women who were in San Damiano at the time. 50. That's quite a community, in consensus. At the time you would expect that the abbess signed the document. No, all of them in consensus. Clare leads, Clare governs as a mother. And that means she is paying attention to all the needs of all the sisters. Material needs, emotional needs. She will be the last refuge of the one suffering in pain. She's also the teacher, the educator. Here's another sister saying, when the Most Holy Mother used to send the sisters serving outside the monastery, she reminded them to praise God when they saw beautiful trees, flowers, and bushes, and likewise always to praise God for and in all things when they saw all peoples and creatures. A mother to the sisters, and still a sister among the sisters. She, that's in the form of life, the abbess, shall observe the community life in everything, and especially in the church, the dormitory, the refectory, the infirmary, and in clothing. This one is important. If you look at the community, you could not see who is the abbess. Nobody is dressed differently. So it is obvious that Clare subverted the traditional monastic definition of abbess and offered a new kind of community of women, not monastic, not behind a wall. That will come later. But she doesn't want that. Here is finally a passage of her testament. I ask of the one who will be in charge of the sisters after she dies, that she strive to go before the others by virtues and holy behavior more than by office, so that her sisters, incited by her example, do not obey because of the office, but because of the law. She should be far-sighted and wise about her sisters, as a good mother is towards her daughters. Above all, regarding the alms, the donation the Lord will give, she should strive to provide according to the needs of each one. She should also be so kind and accessible that the sister feels safe to express their needs and confident to come back to her anytime, as it will seem expedient to them, as much for themselves as for their sisters. The one in charge of the sisters. That's how Clare invented a new leadership. Example, authority. Thank you.
Very good.
I don't think we should sit down.
Oh.
I bet there's going to be discussion, because there were some provocative thoughts there. And particularly, I'd start. You mentioned the cloistering coming later. Can you say more about that?
Yes. There is, in the 13th century, there is a development of new kinds of religious communities of women. And of course, San Damiano, people hear about it, particularly because the brothers travel, and some women will say, well, is there anything for women in your movement? And then they refer to San Damiano. So the example of Prague with Agnes is only one example. Actually, Clare will send her sister Agnes to a community outside of Florence to help them develop the same kind of life. But the hierarchy of the church has a hard time to allow the women to go take care of themselves. There is the idea that they're not really able to take care of themselves. The men have to protect the women. There is some sort of a projection, and so it's all what I said at the beginning. If they lived together instead of in marriage, then they have to be protected by a wall. And so the trend is to develop what we call the strict enclosure. And we have already papal documents or ecclesiastic document at the time giving prescription. Once she, the woman, enters the community, she will never leave the building anymore. In the form of life that Clare wrote 40 years after experience, and to put in writing what they have lived before she dies, and it would disappear, smartly, she picks and chooses from the documents that have been coming out during those 40 years, but with a little twist. For instance, and after she professes and she is accepted, she will never leave the monastery. And Clare put a comma there, except for obvious necessities. And she does that all along. But after she dies, and Francis is long gone, the brotherhood has evolved, as I mentioned last month, and the relationship brothers and sisters sort of disappeared. And so, yes, they will end up in strict enclosure, and even today they struggle with that.
Are there other questions?
I think that David.
Yeah, please tell me what that word was again that you used at the beginning that described a woman's role in that time period.
Oh, the Latin terms?
Yes.
Maritum aut murum, behind a husband or a wall.
No, there was another one you used. I can't remember. I asked my wife. She can't remember.
Mother, the one you said was mother.
The abbess.
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 Thank you.
Which is the feminine of abbot.
Okay, abbess.
And
Now,
those go back to Hebrew and means father and mother.
Now, with that abbess, that of course that was what was referred by the men who ran the religious organization at the time. Now, is that where the word, as time went on in a covet, a nunnery, where, what's that? A convent. They have the Mother Superior. Is that where that word came from? Mother Superior?
Yes. Exactly. Yes. And that is, the word superior is a word that the first generation with Francis and Clare is not used. On the contrary, it's banned. Because they say we want to be servant, lesser, to promote the others. So you can't be serving superior. It's like a contradiction.
And one last thought, can we really say that Clare was actually one of the first women livers of the time?
The first women
Liberation.
Oh,
Liberation.
well, yes. We can see it from our vocabulary, what we look at it. But it is true that she freed herself with others. I mean, it's interesting.
She kind of broke the mold of
No,
time, right?
that is true. There was absolutely no conflictual. She knows what she wants to do, and she works on it. And like Francis, she has been contagious because other women then, well, yes, we want to do that too. The thing is, she started, then her sister came, then her second sister came, and then the mother came. So after a couple of years, the whole household, because the father, we know the name, but he's not there anymore. The whole household is in San Damiano. But she had to struggle for that because the father is dead, or nobody knows, but there is a man who's ruling. And that uncle, Monaldo, was far from being a happy camper. But what is striking with Clare is, unlike Francis that gets angry, really, Clare does not. she can quietly, and I even picture her with a smile, say, "No, Your Holiness."
I think, Michelle, you had your hand up?
Yeah, who was the Pope at the time that allowed this to go on?
So the Pope was Innocent III, actually probably the brightest and most powerful in the medieval papacy. He dies in 1216, and that is the time that Francis actually has made sure that San Damiano would be recognized beyond the Bishop of Assisi. And then there is Honorius III, who will die the year after Francis and will be replaced by that important character, the Cardinal Ugolino, which after, I would say, 1217, when the Franciscan movement is really expanding, the men first, but also those communities of women. Ugolino is the nephew of Innocent III, and he's sent to organize the whole thing. And with the difficulty it created for Francis, as I talked about last month, and to Clare and the women. But this is where we can see Francis suffers and tries to compose. Clare is smarter and more diplomatic, politically astute.
Brian has his hand up.
Okay. Brian?
Yeah.
So we have a question on there. from
Yeah.
Brian.
Okay.
Right. I appreciate your thoughts today, and I also see a lot of women on the board, and I'd like to hear from some of them.
Can't hear.
I can't hear it. Did you hear it?
I heard the question. I'm not sure I
No.
know what you mean. He says that we have women on the board and you want to hear from us?
Women are on Zoom
okay.
and in the audience,
board.
and I haven't heard women speaking.
Well, I'm not sure if I can ask you to speak, Dan. Give us a minute, Brian. Dan?
Was there any movement later on where women started to push higher into the hierarchy of the church, looking even to the pastoral or the priest level? Was there any ever talk about that level of effort by women?
There will be other women individually or in small groups that will not be able to manage as well as Clare has managed. Some will be persecuted, some will be excommunicated, some may even be executed.
Nice.
Yes, by fire.
Oh my gosh.
Is it true that there was a female pope at one point?
I never got very deep into that story. Is it true or is it a legend? I couldn't answer yes or no. The only thing I can tell you is that the papacy has not always been holy.
I would have never imagined that.
So where, now Hildegard of Bingen, she's prior to...
Yes,
to,
she's a Benedictine nun, And she was an artist also, composed song and spiritual, but it's part of the monastic tradition, which is, what would be the difference? Well, the difference is that a monastery of monks or nuns own lands and people working. Actually, the same way that the nobility of Assisi owns land and people working, and they get the fruit of their labor. So that's exactly what, to be part of the movement started by Francis, that's exactly what Clare and her sisters refuse. They don't need to go on the road, but they don't want to be landowners with people working for them. They work to provide for their needs.
So they're breaking from the feudal tradition.
Exactly. You have the word. I didn't want to emphasize. They're breaking from the feudal tradition. The words common, community, in common, is all the writings of Clare.
Another question, obviously she was upper class where she lived, or was raised.
Lady Clare.
Yeah. Now obviously she was highly educated and she had a flair for political things, so she knew how to maneuver through that. Where did she get that education from? Was it?
Probably from the canons of the cathedral. She lives in the family house was next to the cathedral of San Rufino, and the cathedral have a chapter of canons, upper class clergy, and a school. There is the cathedral school. So she got education, obviously, much more than Francis, who in the lower Assisi at the parish school got some education that allowed him to run the business with his father, and also to read and write a little in Latin, like a first grade. We have a couple of autographs, so we can see that. But Francis was receptive. And so once he got brothers who were educated, he used them positively.
Fabulous. We have one last question, and then I think we should wind down for today. So, Jeff?
An indiscreet question.
Okay.
If I can ask it in all due respect. Seems that the Catholic Church, I'm speaking as an outsider now, Catholic Church still, after all these centuries, is governed by men.
Yeah.
All the cardinals are men, and the Pope is always a man.
Mm-hmm.
What's the problem? What's the thought, the principle, the justification that allows that?
Patriarchy.
Yeah.
I think it goes back. Let me say the Bible, and I'm not talking of the Christian Bible, also Hebrew Bible, what the Christian will call the Old Testament, Genesis. God created the Adam, the human being. And God created the human being in God's image and likeness, male and female. That was, according to the scholars, written by a woman. Then a man, chapter 2, revisit the story. The Adam, he felt lonely. So God had mercy because God is merciful. And he put Adam to sleep, and while Adam was asleep, took a rib from Adam and fashioned it into the woman Eve. That was written by a man.
Yeah.
But we have that, go back, read the beginning of Genesis, you have two stories of the creation of the humankind. And the story of the woman come out of a man's rib means, hey, the man was first and has to remain first. It's not just in the Catholic Church. We still don't have a woman president in the country.
Yeah.
We almost did, almost.
Almost.
Popular vote, we did. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
I'm very inspired by Claire's story. It's just incredible to me, and putting it in the context of 800 years ago and all of the strictures she had to break out of, just, it's mind-boggling.
Yep.
We have a hymn, final hymn, and Julie, you jumped on the piano to play it? So I had thought we were going to do it on YouTube, but you'd rather do it on piano?
Piano.
Okay, excellent. Well, then I will step aside so I don't reverb into the thing there. But hymn number 131, Love Will Guide Us. And stand as you so. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of our community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Now I'll have Julie's postlude. I will actually extinguish it. us for coffee. I don't know if there are treats, but conversation following our service. And wonderful to see everyone. Happy Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. See you soon. Thank you.